there. This is going to be a kind of the baseline, and many of the subsequent sessions that you'll be able to attend later today will go a little bit deeper into some of the resources that we're going to talk about. So again, you may not get all your questions answered here, but if they are not, we will provide you with our contact information at the very end of the session, and you're more than welcome to go ahead and email myself or Katie, and either us or one of our staff members will be able to help you from that point forward. Katie, are we good with our intros? Ready to move on? All
Yep.
right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about general transition to college. And again, we're going to take each of these for my section about we're going to take it from an approach of what are some of the issues that we see and kind of what are some of the conversations or the ways that you as a family member can help. So number one, the first issue is, and again, some of you who maybe have had students go away to school or attend college may be thinking, well, yeah, these are no-brainers. But I know we also have many parents in the room here and family members who this is maybe their first student going off to college. So we're gonna tackle them all here. So the first one is the separation from home, family, and friends. You know, we have students coming here who are coming from just across the Maryland line in Bethesda to clear across the country to places around the world. So thinking through what that separation is like, that it's kind of a redo period. So it's making new friends, it's finding a new home, it's reconnecting with others, and it's how does that relationship with your family different now that the student is away. The second one is roommates and communal living. So if I was doing this in a big conference room or a big ballroom, I would ask you to raise your hand and say, well, how many of your students currently now are sharing a room? And I would imagine that some may be, but many are not. Well, one of the big changes is that most of your students will be asked to be living in a much tighter community once they come to AU. And again, most of them having a roommate. So what is that like? How do roommates communicate? What adjustments need to be made in this communal living setting? The third issue that we'll put out there is the general making friends and getting connected. And I think as an adult and as you get older, often it gets harder to do that. So many of you may have moved communities, and when you move to a new community, making friends, how do you get established in your community is something that can be difficult. So thinking about what is your students' intentional plans to get connected to the AAU community, to the greater District of Columbia community, how do they make friends? And we are going to help your students with that, but it's a good topic to be thinking about, to making sure that they have that connection to feel like, so that they feel like they do belong here. And then the last issue here in kind of the general category is the freedom and personal responsibility. And Katie is going to talk a little bit more about that in the second half of the presentation. So when we talk about conversations and things to be thinking about as a parent or family member, number one, communication about how is your student going to communicate with you? What are the expectations? Do you expect your student to be in communication with you all day long via text, versus maybe do you expect them to be making a phone call to you maybe once a week? And is there an established time to do that? So I think clearly communicating the expectations about when do you think you'll hear from your student? How often is that? What method is that? Is that text? Is it a phone call? And then even taking that one step further in terms of visiting. How often would your student be coming home? How often may you be coming to campus to visit and meet up with your student? I think are important conversations to have. I will say, having worked here in the Dean of Students office, we do often get some frantic family members who are contacting us because, oh, I haven't heard from my student in the last 3 hours. Again, you will need to have that conversation with your student, but what expectations are realistic? Thinking about your student's class schedule, what are the other things that they're going to be involved with as well? Second conversation is around roommates and conflict resolution. So I worked in university housing for 10 years and worked very closely with first-year students. And I will say that oftentimes some of the roommate conflicts that we would see percolate from very minute little details that build up in the room or in the suite or in the apartment. So I think it's important for your student and their roommate or roommates to have the conversations about setting the standards for the room. What is the expectation around guests? What is the expectations around sharing things in the room? What is the expectations around what time in the room is used for social time versus studying time? And for those of you who have students who will be living with us, this is something that our residence life staff will help your students. They will help facilitate those types of conversations. But again, I think this is a conversation that is helpful to be had early on as well. The third is about campus, campus and community involvement. We want our students to be connected. We want them to be involved. This area kind of runs the gamut. We have some students who this is a struggle for them. We also have some students who overcommit. So trying to figure out what is that appropriate balance for your student in terms of what commitments they make outside of the classroom. My advice would be to find one or two organizations or groups. Maybe it's an on-campus job, maybe it's a religious organization, and look at those closely versus signing up for everything. And again, our staff, particularly in the areas of our Center for Student Involvement, as well as our other student engagement areas, are going to help your student figure that out and provide a lot of opportunities to make those connections. And then last is the conversation on decision-making and accountability. And I'm going to hold on that one and let Katie address that when we get to her section. Next slide, please. All right, so we want to talk a little bit about academic transition, and your students going to hear a little bit more about this once they get a little more connected to their school. But I think it's important for parents and family members to recognize and just hear some of the things that we sometimes see. So some of the issues, particularly for those of you who have not had a student go to college, or if you did not go yourself, issues surrounding rigor, that for many of our students, the academic rigor is going to be different coming from high school. So calling that out and recognizing that, I think, is very important. Also, when you think about grading and the schedule, so oftentimes your grade may be based on 2 or 3 assignments, or maybe it's 2 or 3 exams and a final presentation versus every single homework assignment contributing to the grade. And again, I'm speaking in very much in generalities here because every professor will provide this information in the syllabus, but it's important to know that oftentimes this is a transitional challenge for many of our students. Also the schedule. I think many of you have realized this because maybe you've seen your student's schedule, but most of our classes do not meet every day. Most classes meet twice a week, and that contributes to some challenges for our students as well, because of the, I guess, level of infrequency compared to high school that some of the classes meet. So making sure that your student understands that, and that some preparation in terms of time and organization is definitely needed there. The last one I'll comment on here is communication with faculty and advisors. And I hope as you continue to engage in the orientation process, as well as Eagle Summit when you are on campus in August, that you will be able to have the chance to meet our faculty and advisors. They are wonderful. They are also human beings that, despite what some of our students think, they are approachable and they want to get to know your students. So I think thinking about and encouraging your student to communicate directly with their faculty members and their advisor is very important, as they are incredible resources to our students as well. Want to say something quickly about academic alerts. You'll hear more about this, but an academic alert is something your student may get at some point, really anywhere from about a month into the semester until the end of the semester. This is a signal that your student may be struggling. Faculty may issue an academic alert because maybe there's been an attendance issue. They may issue an academic alert to your student if there's a performance issue. So say they did not do well on their first exam, the faculty member may alert the students. And what it is a notice that is emailed to the student as well as the advisor. And oftentimes that'll come with a, come talk with me, come see what we can do to help you out in this class. And what I will say is, I think what's really important here is that your student respond to those alerts, and that they do follow up with their faculty member and their advisor, because oftentimes the faculty member or advisor will have some tactics or some strategies to help the student recover in that class. So again, my key piece there is that they respond. Want to spend a little bit of time talking about academic progress. I think a conversation about when you as a parent or family member expect to know about their progress is very important. I will say oftentimes we see parents who get really fixated on the final grade, and that's great. Of course, you may want to know what the final grade in the class is, but I think encouraging your student to communicate how they are doing in the class periodically over the course of the semester is also important. And the reason for that is if they are struggling at any point early in the semester or even mid-semester, we have a lot of resources which you'll hear about to help them. Once those final grades are issued, there's not a whole lot of assistance there because the class is over. So I think thinking very clearly about how your student will communicate with you about their progress is important. FERPA, I think most of you are probably familiar with what FERPA is. FERPA requires the university to keep your students' academic record private. There are ways to allow a release of that. But again, I really encourage you to think about how will you, what expectations will you put out there to allow your student to communicate back to you. You'll hear much more about this. You will also hear more about the releases in terms of how you can get around that. But again, I think what's priority here is the communication that's going to happen proactively. And then lastly, and your students hearing about this over the course of today, they'll hear more in August, making sure that they're knowledgeable and that they use the many resources we do have here at AU. Next slide, please. All right, real quickly, because I want to make sure Dean Porras has her time here as well. Talking quickly about the social and well-being transition to college. The issues we often see here again, the connections and making friends, their connection to DC. So, many of your students have chosen American because of our connection to the District of Columbia and all of the many great things that come along with being in the nation's capital. Thinking through how will they engage, what will they engage with is important as well. I think even more importantly, and this is what I want to spend a little bit of time on, is issues around well-being, health, and self-care. So the conversations that go with that are, what is your student going to be doing to make sure that they are taking care of themselves physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally during their time here at AU? We know that a time of transition can be a little bit of an up and down, sometimes a roller coaster. So what are they going to do to make sure that those well-being aspects are being taken care of? Health maintenance. So if your student has any sort of chronic medical or mental health conditions, what is being done? What conversations are you having now to make sure that those steps can be continued while they are here at AU? And again, I know I'm speaking in very much generalities here. You will have the opportunity to hear from our Student Health Center, as well as specifically from our Center for Wellbeing and Psychological Services elsewhere in the program. And then also thinking about the basic needs around sleep, food, nutrition, exercise. What will they do? There's a lot more freedom there. How does your student maintain a good sleep schedule? What are they going to do to make sure that they are getting the exercise that they need? What will they be doing to make sure that they are eating nutritiously so that they can feel prepared to be in the classroom and to do all the other things that they will be doing? And then lastly, thinking through what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if your student does have an injury? How will your student communicate that with you? Is appropriate coverage around healthcare and other items set up and available, and thinking through some of those. We certainly don't want those situations to happen, but inevitably for some students, they may have a health issue that does need to be addressed, and we want to make sure that that we are ready for that. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and transition to Dean Porras for the second part of our presentation. Katie.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Again, for those of you who might just be joining us, my name is Katie Porras, and I'm an Associate Dean of Students and Director of Student Accountability and Restorative Practices. And our office is responsible for upholding the community standards and policies from our Student Conduct Code with students. And I know it's probably a little funny in your first session with us to be hearing from the accountability office, but just as important as the items on your to-do list around getting your student registered for classes and getting information about move-in, it's also important to think and prepare your student for how to live in community, how to resolve conflict, and being aware of the different policies and local and federal laws that are in our jurisdiction. So One of the things that we talk about in our student conduct process is that a student conduct process is pretty different from a legal process. We consider our process to be educational. You may think of negative connotations that come with a disciplinary process, but for us, we want to make sure that the students have learn about their choices, how to make healthy, safe choices for themselves, and also understand how their choices impact our community. So when we work with students, these are the tenets of our process. We regard each student as an individual that deserves attention, consideration, and respect. Every person that works within our office or within our process is trained to consider the facts fully and carefully before resolving any case. We don't make any assumptions about the students that we work with or about their behavior. We speak very candidly and honestly with the students that we work with. And so we do want to challenge them to think a little bit about what brought them to our office, but also to think about how they move forward from the incident, how they repair harm that's caused. We hold our students to the highest standards of behavior, both because it's really important in our office to keep our campus community safe, but also because ethical student development is something that we want your students when they leave American University to have developed. We recognize that the students that we work with, they are still learning. And so we are understanding and recognizing that this is a new adventure for them, that mistakes will be made. And we try to work with them to educate them, to help them learn in a place where it does not feel punitive. And lastly, we contribute to the educational mission of American University by designing policies, conducting programs that contribute to the intellectual and ethical development of the entire campus community. So as you all are starting to think about conversations with your student about moving in, about being a college student, about your expectations for their behavior while they're here at American University, one helpful document is our Student Conduct Code, which is published on our website as well as the university's website. And this is the primary policy document for all AU students. It outlines all of the rules and prohibited conduct, both for campus-wide as well as for our residential students and the residence hall regulations, and that will be more specific to things like you can't bring pets into the halls, or here's how many days a visitor can stay in your residence hall room. It also describes the procedures for our variety of disciplinary proceedings that we use. Students are going to receive this information in a multitude of ways. They will hear about it today. They will also hear about it at their first floor meetings when they move in with their resident assistants and community directors. And then in the AU portal, when students sign on for the first time, there is an acknowledgement and a hyperlink that students can click on to review the Student Conduct Code. It is the student's responsibility to review it. And I think that as a family member, it's important to encourage them to be aware of what the community standards are. But I think if you review our conduct code, you'll see that there's nothing that is surprising in terms of the expectations that we have for students. So I wanted to talk with you about kind of three trends or three topics that in the realm of student conduct that a lot of we talk a lot with families about. So the first one is alcohol at American University. And again, the frame of mind that we're approaching this from are to help you as you have those conversations with your students, to prepare them to talk about your expectations of them as a student. So when we think about alcohol at American University and we look at our data, one thing that we can say is that the trends that we see at American University are the same trends that we're seeing at other institutions, both locally and nationwide. We do see students arriving to college campuses who are self-reporting that this is not the first time they've consumed alcohol, that they have experimented prior to coming to college. And so the experimentation that we see is not necessarily trying alcohol for the first time, but maybe over consuming or trying different types of alcohol that they have not had access to prior. Another trend that we also see regarding alcohol use is pre-gaming. Pre-gaming tends to be around an event. Sometimes it can be a sporting event, sometimes it may be before you go out to some type of establishment where if you're underage, you suspect that you may not be able to consume alcohol. And so when we hear students talk about pre-gaming, typically what they're talking about is consuming alcohol in a rapid fashion before an event. This is obviously very high risk behavior. And it also indicates that students use more hard liquor when they are pre-gaming. When we talk with students about alcohol, one of the things that we hear about is that there's a real lack of understanding related to how alcohol metabolizes in the human body. And this obviously makes sense because the learning they're receiving in high school is this is not something you should be doing. So they don't have access to things like, your blood alcohol content. And if you weigh this much and you drink this much, this is what your blood alcohol content will be. And so there are opportunities at the university and offices that do try to provide that information and access to that information for our students. It's really important that as you think about setting expectations with your students and personal use of alcohol, to be aware of what some of the impacts are. And again, these are some of the self-reported impacts that we hear from students. And it includes everything from missing classes to negative impact on the relationships that they have with other students. And it includes some of the high-risk behavior that our office adjudicates. So things like vandalism and physical violence are typically coupled with the significant use of alcohol. One thing that I do want to make sure that as family members you are aware of is that there are instances where if a student has consumed or overconsumed alcohol and requires medical assistance and is transported to the hospital, that rather than send them through our student conduct process, we have them meet with a staff member from the Center for Wellbeing and Psychological Services. And in this meeting, it's really more focused on providing them that educational information. And the reason that we approach it that way instead of through the formal process is we want to make sure that the number one thing with your students is that they are healthy and safe. So we want to ensure that students feel comfortable calling for help when they notice that their friend is intoxicated and needs assistance. And so that's why we approach that in that manner. After alcohol, the second, or I guess the most common drug that we see at American University is marijuana. One of the things that we think is important for you, again, as family members who are supporting your students to be aware of, is that the landscape with marijuana is changing. And there's been a lot of changes in the past few years around the legalization in the states. It's important for you and your students to know what the status is in the District of Columbia. So first off, what I will say is since we do receive federal funds, marijuana, medical marijuana is prohibited both in the student conduct code and prohibited in the residence halls and on campus. It is legal in the District of Columbia. You have to be 21 years old. It must be in what is considered private residential property. So AU would be excluded from that. It continues to be prohibited on federal property. And this is very important because throughout the District of Columbia, there are pockets of federal property. I've been living here for 15 years. I'm still surprised when I run into something that I didn't realize was federal property. And then it is prohibited if you possess 2 ounces or more. We find that when we talk with students about what the status of marijuana is in terms of legalization, that they are aware of it, but they don't always realize that there's some significant caveats in the District of Columbia. So that is really important. And then one final note is that vaping is prohibited on campus. So then the third trend or the third topic that we receive a lot of questions about is around organizational misconduct. So similar to our students being held accountable under our student conduct code, student organizations are also held accountable under the student conduct code. Student organizations are amazing, a great way to get involved, a great way for students to develop a network. There are so many benefits to it. We want to ensure that your students' participation in student organizations and initiation into those organizations is healthy and equitable and fair. And so when we talk about organizational misconduct, what we're talking about is when there's processes for students' initiation or admission into a group, organization, or team that maybe are not healthy. And the university does have a hazing policy that is on our website if you'd like to look at this, but these are typically some of the symptoms we see from students that give us cause for concern. And so I'm not going to read each of them, but what I am going to share with you is that we take hazing very seriously. It is not something that is welcome in our community. And we hold organizations and sometimes individuals accountable at very high levels when we find that there is evidence of hazing. If you are hearing from your student, hey, this is happening to me, and maybe it's one of the items on this list, and you're concerned, the Dean of Students Office has a form on its website that you can submit that we will review and then determine what the appropriate course of action is to pursue in terms of how to either collect information or hold that group or individuals accountable. It can be submitted anonymously. You can encourage your students to submit something if they're telling you about a friend who's experiencing hazing or organizational misconduct. We do take this really seriously. So Jeff, I think I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Katie. So let's move into kind of our final stage here, and it's talking about resources and kind of what you can do from a general perspective here. And I do realize that for many of you, what you've just heard is a lot, and many of you may need some time to digest and sit with some of these topics. But from a general perspective, a few things for you as a parent or a family member to consider as we are moving through this transition and through the orientation process. Number one, maintain perspective. Transition is hard. For many of you who have maybe been through major life transitions, you know that. And helping our students maintain that perspective and realizing that kind of maybe an emotional roller coaster is somewhat normal with the transition. And I think where we have seen things get even more out of control is when parents or family members are on that roller coaster with your student. So if there are opportunities for you to help maintain that perspective and help your student realize that, it's going to be fun, it's going to be great, it's a new challenge, it's a great opportunity, but there may be some bumps in the road as we go through the transition. Listen and ask specific questions. I think you all probably know that if you just ask your student how's AU going, how's college going, you're going to probably get the answer of fine. So what are those specific questions you can ask? What is the information that you can maybe arm yourself with to have ahead of time? So for example, what types of classes are they taking? Are you able to ask the question to say like, hey, how is your government class going? How is your college writing class going? And really think of ways to get some quality information from your student, because I know not all times are they going to be really forthcoming with that. Again, going back to the piece that we started with, set, communicate, and revisit those expectations. Maybe emphasizing the revisit. So what are those key points or key times, to revisit and talk about those expectations? Is it maybe when you come for family weekend? Is it over our fall break if your student is going to come home? What are those, what is the timely piece around that? Be knowledgeable of university resources and consult when appropriate. So again, you've heard a little bit about them already. You will hear a little bit more as we wrap up this sessions, and you'll hear a lot more detail once you get into the subsequent sessions today. You as a parent or family member are more than welcome to also reach out to those resources if you have questions about the offerings, what services are provided, what resources are provided as well. And I think you'll continue to hear that message throughout the orientation process. Along with that, encouraging your students to use them. I know oftentimes our students, a lot of our students are very high achieving high school students and may not think they need the resources that we have, but you being knowledgeable of them and also encouraging them to reach out to those, even oftentimes in some cases before they think they need them, is certainly appropriate. Resist the urge to solve the issues for your student. And I saw a comment about this in the chat as Katie was talking, but our goal is for your students to become independent adults, and we want that. And I think one of the steps in doing that is oftentimes not having parents and family members jumping in to fix the problems for them. So I think oftentimes there are situations that arise where your student may need to struggle with it a little bit to figure it out on their own, because I think that's our goal, is we want them to be able to figure out these issues on their own and be an adult. So certainly you can be there to support, but I think when appropriate, resisting that urge to jump in is very appropriate there. Coaching your student through failures. And when I say failures, I don't mean like catastrophic, I failed a class. Little letdowns, little things, little things that come along this road in transition, and helping them realize that those little points of failure, if you will, are completely normal. And how can you recover from them? How can you be realistic in terms of learning from those failures, I think is very important. I think having students and others share those failures is important as well, so that students realize that that is a part of, certainly a part of normal life. Empowering your students to make healthy choices in the areas of everything we spoke about: sleep, nutrition, exercise, their daily schedules. And again, we have resources on campus to help them with that. And then lastly, making sure that particularly if there are chronic healthcare conditions, making sure that arrangements are made ahead of time for continued healthcare in those areas, because we certainly want that, we don't want that to be a barrier to their success here at AU. Next slide, please. So real quickly here, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are some of the more popular places to go / university resources on our campus. And again, you will be hearing from many of these. A few that I want to call out real quickly is, number one, the Office of the Dean of Students. So the Office of the Dean of Students has a team of folks whose job is to support students and work with students on an individual basis when they encounter any type of struggle at the university. So it might be a health struggle, it may be a family concern, it may be a medical issue. Particularly if you or your student don't know where to go and maybe you're stuck in terms of what resources to tap into, starting with the Office of the Dean of Students is a perfect place to do that. That is what that team of staff does every day, every week of the school year. So kind of file that one in the back of your head, that if you just don't know where to reach out, start with the Office of the Dean of Students. Super easy way to contact them via email is dos@american.edu, and you'll see that address at the end of the presentation. Also a plug to just making sure that your student is connecting with their first year advisor. Another tremendous resource. They are staff that are train and specifically work with new students to the university. So it is crucial that your student have a connection to that staff member here at the university as well. And then lastly, I'll call out our residential life staff. I know many of you will hear a session from residential life and housing, but considering we house more than half of our undergraduate students, they provide a tremendous service in terms of support, in terms of activities and social things in the residence halls, but also most importantly, building that community for when they arrive here at AU is one of their roles. Next slide, please. So how can you help? So if you fell asleep when we started, this is a great summary of key points to kind of remember as we wrap up here. Excuse me, I'm wrong screen there. So number one, setting expectations around behavior and communication goes back to those first 3 slides that I spoke about. Thinking through what are you going to hold your student accountable for? How are you going to communicate that? And also, how do you expect your student to communicate with you about their progress, as well as if any concerns arise, and how will you be there to support them through that? Holding your students accountable to the expectations you set, whether that's grades, whether that's involvement expectations, whether that's communication. How will you do that, and how will you communicate that to your student? Having the conversations early and frequently. That's why we're doing this front and center with orientation. We're doing this as early as possible and sharing this information with you so you have some time to think about that and strategize how you will do that with your student within your own family context. Regular check-ins with your student during high-risk times of the semester. So particularly those first 6 weeks, that is the challenge there for our students. Is the first 6 weeks is generally that period of time that can be the most difficult in terms of a transition. Within those first 6 weeks, they're going to be moving in, they're going to be getting to know the community, they're going to be getting to know the other residents on their floor if they are living with us. They will be encountering probably their first round of exams within those first 6 weeks, particularly toward the end of that. So making sure that you have a plan and checking in with them and communicating with them, I think, is really important. Also, other high-risk times of the semester, generally around midterms, and then also kind of right around the breaks as Dean Porras was talking about a little bit earlier. Encouraging safety of themselves as well as others. So we really do encourage our students to be on the lookout for each other. We are a community and we expect that, but also what are those safety precautions your student will take? And again, I know you'll have a session later, an opportunity to hear from our staff within our University Police Department and Police and Safety Services, but making sure that they are taking any precautions that they need to. And then lastly, reporting behavior when you are concerned. So if you have a concern, and Dean Porras mentioned this, we have mechanisms for you to share that information with us. As we talked a little bit before, we often are sometimes limited in sharing things back to you without your students' permission. However, you are more than welcome if you have a concern to share that information with us. And again, if you don't know what the appropriate venue for that is, I would always encourage you to start with the Office of the Dean of Students as that point of contact. And if it is not that staff, they will then work with you to make sure that information is getting to the appropriate parties there. Next slide, please. So here is a little bit of information in terms of contacts. If you have specific questions, Office of the Dean of Students, dos@american.edu. Also, if you have questions specific to anything that Dean Porras mentioned, you have the conduct@american.edu email, as well as our phone number. That phone number is answered generally 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. If for some reason you get a voicemail, please leave a voicemail and our staff will give you a call back. If you ever happen to be on campus, we're in Butler Pavilion 406 and 408, which is located right above the bridge. Katie, do you have any wrap up here, as we are right on time, it looks like?
I don't. Just thank you for joining us. And if you have questions, please feel free to email us.
Awesome. Well, again, as I said at the beginning, we are extremely excited for our new class of students. It's our summer is going by very rapidly, as I imagine many of you are feeling the same as you're preparing to bring your student here to AU. Katie and I certainly hope that the information you had today was valuable and beneficial to you. And if there's anything that we can do to clarify anything or answer any of your questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I do encourage you to attend as many of the sessions as you can that are after this, as many of those will provide additional information on topics that we have already spoken about. So other than that, we'll just say congratulations, good luck. I believe at this point you can go back to the main room and then they will set you up for the breakouts that are after this. So thank you all. Have a great day.